The rain fell in cold, heavy sheets against the dim glow of the drugstore window. Inside, a young mother stood trembling at the counter, her hands clutching a small prescription slip that had already begun to curl at the edges from the damp air. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, the only sound louder than her pounding heart. Her name was Emily Carter, and in that moment she felt the walls of the world closing in. Her little boy, Oliver, just 7 years old, was home with a high fever and a rattling cough that refused to fade. The doctor had said it was pneumonia, and that without antibiotics, it could worsen quickly. Emily had nodded and thanked him, hiding the fear that burned inside her chest. She had already sold her wedding ring to pay for the doctor's visit. Now, all she had left were a few wrinkled bills and the desperate hope that somehow it would be enough to buy the medicine her son needed to live. She stepped closer to the counter as the pharmacist read the prescription and began typing it into the computer. Each clack of the keys sounded like a countdown to heartbreak. When the total flashed on the screen, $87.50, her breath caught in her throat. Her fingers fumbled over the bills in her hand, counting again and again as if the numbers would somehow change. They didn't. She had $43, not a cent more. "Ma'am," the pharmacist asked gently, his eyes kind but tired, "do you want me to fill it?" Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Can you just give me half the dose, maybe half the bottle?" He sighed, "I'm sorry, that's not how antibiotics work. It has to be the full course." She nodded numbly, her mind spinning. Behind her the line grew longer, but she couldn't move. She couldn't think. Every second that passed meant Oliver's condition was getting worse. The fever had been rising so fast earlier that she'd had to soak towels in cold water just to bring it down. He looked up at her through hazy eyes and said, "Mommy, am I gonna be okay?" And she'd smiled through the tears, whispering, "Of course you are, baby." But inside she'd felt the lie crush her. She looked down at her shaking hands and mumbled, "I'm sorry, I'll come back." She started to back away, clutching her purse to her chest, her heart splintering into 1,000 pieces. Backhand index pointing right. If you believe kindness still exists in this world, if you believe in helping others even when no one's watching, please take a moment to like this video, share it, and subscribe to our channel. Stories like these remind us that small acts of love can change lives. As Emily turned to leave, a deep voice from behind her said, "Wait." The sound was calm but firm, the kind that made everyone else in line pause. She turned slowly and saw a tall man, maybe in his early 40s, wearing a worn brown leather jacket and holding a box of cough drops. His eyes met hers, steady, kind, and unexpectedly familiar. He stepped forward, took out his wallet, and looked at the pharmacist. "Put it on my bill," he said simply. Emily froze. "No, please," she stammered. "You don't have to." He shook his head gently. "I know I don't, but I want to." The pharmacist looked between them, uncertain, but the man nodded again, and that was it. The transaction happened in seconds, but to Emily, it felt like a miracle. She stood there, unable to move, tears welling up in her eyes as the man took his receipt and turned to her. He didn't smile arrogantly or wait for praise. He just said softly, "Make sure your little one gets better," and started to walk away. "Wait," Emily called after him, her voice cracked with emotion. "Why would you do this for me?" He stopped at the door, glanced back, and said, "Someone once did the same for me." And then he was gone, out into the rain, disappearing like a ghost of grace. That night Emily returned home through the downpour, holding the medicine close to her chest like treasure. The tiny apartment smelled faintly of damp laundry and children's medicine, but it was home. Oliver was curled up on the couch, pale and weak, his little chest rising and falling unevenly. She knelt beside him, brushed his sweaty hair away, and whispered, "I got it, sweetheart." His eyes fluttered open and a faint smile crossed his lips. "You did." She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Yes, baby, someone helped us." As she gave him the first spoonful of medicine, tears rolled down her cheeks. Each drop felt like a prayer answered, not just for the medicine, but for the reminder that humanity still lived in strangers' hearts. The next few days were long and sleepless. Emily sat by Oliver's side, watching him slowly regain color and strength. Every cough that lessened, every small smile that returned, it all felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. And every time she thought of that man in the leather jacket, her chest tightened. Who was he? Why did he help her? She didn't even get his name. When Oliver finally woke up one morning and said, "Mommy, I'm hungry," Emily laughed for the first time in weeks. It was the sound of relief, raw, trembling, beautiful. She hugged him tightly and whispered, "You scared me, little man." A week later, when Oliver was strong enough to go outside, Emily decided to find the man who'd helped them. She went back to the drugstore and asked the pharmacist if he knew him. The pharmacist thought for a moment, then said, "That man? Yeah, I've seen him a few times. Name's Jack Nolan. Comes in once a month for his heart meds. Lives near the old veterans' home down on Pine Street, I think." The name struck something in her, a faint memory from years ago, but she couldn't place it. Still, she thanked the pharmacist and decided to visit. The veterans' home was a humble brick building surrounded by a small garden of fatting flowers. When she arrived, she saw a few elderly men sitting outside, chatting quietly. One of them pointed her to Jack's room. She hesitated at the door before knocking softly. Jack looked up from his chair when she entered. He seemed surprised but smiled. "I was wondering when you'd come by." She blinked. "You remembered me." "Hard to forget someone with eyes full of worry," he said kindly. Emily stepped closer. "I came to thank you properly. You saved my son's life." Jack's gaze softened. "I didn't save him, you did. I just helped a little." She shook her head. "You don't understand. I had nothing left. You gave me hope." Her voice broke. "No one ever done something like that for me before." Jack looked out the window for a long moment before saying, "I know what it's like to have nothing. Years ago, when my wife got sick, I couldn't afford her medicine either. I stood in a pharmacy just like you did, same fear, same helplessness, and some stranger paid for it. I never got his name, but I swore that if I ever could, I'd do the same for someone else. Took me a while to get here, but I kept my promise." Emily felt tears spill freely. "I wish there were more people like you." He chuckled softly. They're just quiet about it." She stayed and talked with him for a long time that day. They shared stories of loss, of love, of small miracles that the world too often forgets to notice. When she left, she promised to visit again, and she did. Every week. Oliver grew fond of Jack too, calling him Grandpa Jack. He'd sit beside him, listening to his stories about serving in the army and how bravery didn't always mean fighting wars. Sometimes it meant just helping one person when you could. Months passed, and life began to feel brighter again. Emily found part-time work at a diner and saved little by little. Jack became part of their small family, joining them for dinners, birthdays, and quiet Sunday afternoons. But one winter morning, Emily received a call from the veterans' home. Jack had passed away peacefully in his sleep. The news hit her like a wave. She sat on the floor, clutching the phone, tears falling uncontrollably. Oliver hugged her tightly, whispering, "Mommy, Grandpa Jack's with the angels now." A few days later, they attended his small funeral. Only a handful of people came, a few veterans, a nurse, and Emily and Oliver. As they lowered the casket, Emily noticed a folded letter placed among the flowers on top. The nurse handed it to her afterward, saying, "He asked us to give this to you." Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside, in neat, shaky handwriting, were the words, "Dear Emily, don't cry for me. I've had a full life. But if you really want to honor me, don't let the kindness stop here. When you see someone in need, someone standing where you once stood, help them, even if it's small. That's how the world heals, one act at a time. Jack." Emily held the letter to her heart and cried quietly, not out of sorrow alone, but gratitude for having known a man who reminded her that goodness still walks among us, even when the world feels cold. A year later, Emily stood once again in the same drugstore, now dressed in her diner uniform after a long shift. Ahead of her in line was a young woman clutching a baby, her hands shaking as she counted coins on the counter. The pharmacist said something, and Emily saw the woman's face crumble, the same look she once worn. Without hesitation, Emily stepped forward and said softly, "Put it on my bill." The woman turned, eyes wide with disbelief. "Why would you?" Emily smiled through her tears. "Someone once did the same for me." The woman began to cry, and the world, for a fleeting second, felt warm again. Backhand index pointing right. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us spread real stories of hope, compassion, and humanity. And if you believe kindness can still change the world, help us prove it. Dove, before you go, tell us in the comments. Have you ever been helped by a stranger, or helped someone without expecting anything in return?